Hi, I'm Paul McGuire, author of The Babylon Code, along with my co-author Troy Anderson. I want to talk to you about something that's extremely important, what we call a convergence of accelerated crisis hitting both the United States of America, Europe, and the rest of the world. Now, this convergence of crisis, which we detail and explain in the Babylon Code, is critical for you to understand. Let's look at some hypothetical scenarios. Number one, the Greek debt crisis will explode again. And when it does, it will cause a ripple effect of financial crisis throughout the European Union, infecting, if you will, virally, Great Britain, and then come across what's called the Transatlantic Union into the United States of America. What will that mean for you in practical terms? Well, when the Greek government enforced austerity programs on the Greek people, they were only allowed to take $60 a day out of their banks or ATM machines, just $60. And if that didn't buy food, well, tough luck. Now, in an economic crisis, a contagion, if you will, a financial contagion, this would spread from Greece throughout the European Union into nations like Germany and France, and then Great Britain, of course Ireland and the rest of the EU. But then you would see a wave of bank holidays and bank closings and people locked out from their banks. Panic would arise. There would be riots in the streets, as we saw in Greece, buildings being burned. This would then spread across what's called the Transatlantic Union into the United States of America. The same thing then would happen in the US, which happened in Greece. You would see the banks closed. You would see that the average depositor, you, would only be able to take out, let's say, $60 per day. This would result in riots, anarchy, looting, and in a worst case scenario, a suspension of the Constitution and Bill of Rights and the declaration of martial law to manage an emergency. Will that happen? That's one question. And I want to put a comma on that question for just a moment, because I want to examine a second convergence crisis, and that would be the geopolitical military conflict that spans from Russia, interfaces with the Ukraine and the European Union and the United States, and then goes throughout Europe into the Middle East, where what we could call the hot zones of activity are currently exploding. That would be Iran with its nuclear enrichment, or in reality, nuclear weapons buildup program. It would encompass nations like Turkey. It would spread into Iraq, which is the location of ancient Babylon. It would go into Syria and Qatar, and it would affect the entire Middle Eastern region in what would be called a super crisis. As we explain in the book, The Babylon Code, the entire European, Asian, continental mass has been called Eurasia for centuries. And every great military general understood that if he wanted to control the world, he had to control Eurasia. And this goes back, of course, to Alexander the Great. What will happen next is that there will be a regional thermonuclear war, potentially World War III. And most likely this crisis will erupt with Iran, currently building up nuclear weapons despite the so-called peace treaty. It will involve Israel, which will fight back to protect itself. And then it will draw in Syria, Iraq, and players like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and then the Western nations like the United States and the EU will send in soldiers, and it will be a cataclysmic war. But it's important for you to understand that this cataclysmic war was predicted not only thousands of years ago, it was predicted in the early days of America. We reveal this in the Babylon Code. Because you see, as we're looking at this convergence and acceleration of current events, there is a warning system that goes back to ancient Babylon, and it's presented in the form of a code. And when the Babylon story that began at the Tower of Babel and reappears in the book of Revelation 17 and 18 with the reappearance of commercial Babylon and religious Babylon, we see that the coding mechanism is reactivated. So, it's possible to understand with a fair degree of certainty what is going to happen geopolitically before it happens. Let me give you a case in point. As this geopolitical crisis erupts, and it will involve China, it will involve Russia, it will involve India, the EU, and the United States. Because a third flashpoint in this acceleration of crisis is the toppling of the US dollar as the de facto world currency, and the replacement of the dollar as the world's currency with what the BRICS nations are proposing. And that would include Russia, China, Iran, and other nations. And the BRICS nations are proposing to get rid of the dollar. And in order to do that, they have to destabilize the power of the dollar. Where does the power of the dollar exist? Where does it reside? As we reveal in the book, The Babylon Code, it doesn't reside in the banks of the Federal Reserve, because the banks of the Federal Reserve are essentially empty. There's nothing in the vaults. There's no gold to back the US dollars. The US dollar, which interfaces with the European Union economic system, has been backed by oil or petrodollars. The US made arrangements with Saudi Arabia and other nations that everybody needs to buy or sell oil in US dollars. That caused the US dollar to be the world currency. But now there's a battle, and people are rebelling from that. Nations are rebelling from the US dollar, and they want to create what's called a basket of currencies, SDRs, special drawing rights, or a collection of currencies. What this means is the arrival of a new world currency and a cashless society. Now I want to pause for a moment. Is it possible that in the Old Testament prophecies and in the account of the Tower of Babel and the origination of ancient Babylon, recorded in Genesis 11, is it possible that there's a coding sequence that tells us in advance what's going to happen in our lifetime and in the near future? I would suggest to you, on the basis of my own personal 40 years of research and the research of my co-author Troy Anderson, a Pulitzer Prize nominated journalist with impeccable credentials and documentation, after extensive research, not only into Bible prophecy, but into economics, the occult, and many other fields of discipline, including quantum physics, we were able to uncover what we call the Babylon Code. And what you see in the Old Testament with the account of the Tower of Babel, or Babel, built by Nimrod, is that there was an astrological worship tower built to worship the host of heaven. The actual translation for Babylon, or the Tower of Babel, comes from the word Gate of the Gods, which suggests that the Tower of Babel was not merely an archaeological structure that has been, they're looking to discover it. It's not just architecture. It is, in fact, the Tower of Babel is a technological device. It's an interdimensional portal, or stargate. Now, I don't expect you to accept that at face value. Of course, you need proof. And we've provided extensive, detailed, meticulous documentation of that proof that we know you'll desire in our book, The Babylon Code. And we have discovered that the system that was originally built in ancient Babylon, we reread it and studied it and consulted physicists and economists and intellectuals and thinkers and conducted extensive research. And we discovered that Babylon was the world's first one world government, one world economic system, and one world religion. But there's a coding sequence built into ancient Babylon, much like there's a coding sequence built into the double helix of the DNA code, that after a particular period of time passes by, and this of course is referenced by the Old Testament prophet Daniel, who had supernatural chronological details of the rise and fall of 4 great Gentile world empires, and finally in the last days the arrival of a global government, global economic system, and global religion. We uncovered the coding sequence of the Babylon Code. And what we have discovered is disturbing. For some, it will be frightening. For many, it will be unsettling. But ultimately, our purpose and intention in writing the Babylon Code was to communicate the information we discovered. Because as Jesus Christ said, you shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Understanding what is going to happen before it happens is a form of intelligence information. And it will prepare you and your family. Not only that, it will give you hope. Hope to transcend, hope to triumph, hope to overcome in the difficult days that are arriving on planet Earth. Our prayer, our goal, our intention in the Babylon Code was to provide you with a tool which will enable you to understand what is going to happen before it happens, but then more importantly, release you to fulfill the destiny that you have personally through your birth on planet Earth. And then finally, that you would have a realization of who you really are as a human being. And, through faith in Jesus Christ, enter heaven and accept eternal life. I want to close by telling you something that I have wrestled with, and I have a certain amount of difficulty disclosing this. But I want you to understand, and I say this with a certain amount of risk, and I'll pose it in the frame of a question. Could it be possible that there are powerful forces at work now that are attempting to destroy the full dissemination and release of the Babylon Code, because the contents of the Babylon Code contain information that is so powerful and so threatening to what I would call the principalities and powers in the cosmokratos that the Apostle Paul talked about? Could it be possible that there is an orchestrated effort to block the release of this book because there are forces that do not want you to know the information and knowledge that is contained in the book? That is why I have recorded this video. A sense of urgency is upon my heart. I feel a burden to get this information out while the window of opportunity is still open. Because the day may come soon when information, such as contained in the Babylon Code, will be censored. It will not be available to you. And I want to say, for those of you that don't know me, Paul McGuire, and my co-author Troy Anderson, we did not write this book with the primary motive of, quote, making money. That is not to say that we don't want the book to make money, because you can't do anything in terms of good without money. But making money was never our primary purpose. Communicating a message of hope and truth was our primary purpose. So please understand that the release and dissemination of the Babylon Code is far more than about the release of a book. We believe that the contents of the Babylon Code have the capacity and the potential to ignite what our founding fathers referred to as a Great Awakening. And America is in the greatest crisis it has ever been since its inception. Our very way of life is threatened in America. We cannot take the gift of America for granted. Despite its many imperfections, it is still a city of light, shining the light on a hill for the whole world to see. I urge you to visit the website paulmcguire.us, and McGuire is McGuire. Get information on the Babylon Code. Tell your friends, spread the word, because when you understand its contents, you will understand my sense of urgency. And I would encourage you to order it, pre-order it now, where we know for sure that it's available. God forbid that these forces would succeed and it would be censored from you and the people that need it the most. The message of the Babylon Code has already gone viral. It's gone global. But I have taken this time to record this urgent video to communicate to you personally. Please stand with me and Troy in what we consider a divine mission in relationship to the Babylon Code. God bless you, and visit our website, paulmcguire.us.